This is the BBC World Service, and on our website you can explore more of our programmes, from documentaries to science. Listen and download at any time by going to bbcworldservice.com. On air, online and on smartphone, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to Newshour from the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall. Fierce fighting in the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol is hampering efforts to rescue hundreds of people trapped in an underground shelter bombed by the Russians.
There is no rescue services in Mariupol. There is no police, there is no fire. There is just people who try to help people to survive.
We'll also hear from the besieged northern city of Chernihiv, plans to set up a special tribunal to try President Putin, and ask what has shaped the thinking of the Russian leader. Also in the programme, is President Assad of Syria being welcomed back into the Arab world after he visits the United Arab Emirates?
The fact that he is being welcomed into a palace in Dubai right now, and so publicly, I think is a win in and of itself.
It's all coming up after the latest news.
Hello, this is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. Efforts to rescue hundreds of people trapped in the basement of a bomb theatre in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol are reported to be hampered by ferocious battles in the area. Ukraine accuses Russia of deliberately targeting the theatre on Wednesday, despite it being marked as a civilian shelter, something Moscow denies. Russian forces have been bombarding Mariupol for weeks as they try to establish a land route to Crimea. Anton Levsiushkin, who lives in Britain, says his twin sister was able to flee.
They've been for like 2 or 3 weeks now with no electricity, water, heating, nothing. Food was running out, and in the end she's scared. She was more afraid of hunger than actually being shelled, but the shelling never stopped since the beginning of March.
In another development, Mariupol's mayor has accused Russia of illegally transferring several thousand residents from his city to Russia. It's not possible to verify the claim. Rescue workers in Ukraine's Black Sea port of Mykolaiv are trying to find survivors among the rubble of a military barracks that was hit on Friday in a Russian missile attack. Dozens of people are thought to have died. Andrew Harding sent this report from the city.
Another air raid siren. Mykolaiv is blocking Russia's advance west along the Black Sea coast, and it's taking a pounding because of that. Wreckage on the streets from another blast that killed 9 civilians queuing for supplies. Shopkeeper Yulia Bubnova tells me, I can't tell you how scared we are. We all live in the cellar now. Nightfall and the sound of Ukrainian anti-aircraft fire echoes across the city of Mykolaiv.
A Ukrainian military spokesman has confirmed that a weapons depot in the west of the country was hit in a Russian missile strike, but could not confirm whether Moscow had used hypersonic weapons. Russia's Ministry of Defense earlier said it had used such weapons. Here's Danny Eberhard.
The use, if confirmed, of hypersonic missiles by Russia would mark an ominous development in the conflict. Their speed gives them great kinetic energy, making them well suited to attack underground or reinforced targets. This, together with the missile's maneuverability, also make them difficult to track. They represent a threat not just to Ukraine, but potentially also to NATO. Russia is a world leader in such missile technology. China too has invested heavily in their development, as increasingly has the United States.
You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC in London. The frontrunner in the Philippine presidential elections, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., has refused to attend a televised debate days after reports emerged that he owed almost $4 billion in unpaid tax. The son of the former Philippine dictator was given an empty podium during the event. Mr. Marcos Jr. has dismissed the reports as fake news. The family of a joint British and Iranian citizen held in Iran say they feel betrayed by the British government. Morad Tabas remained in Iran, while 2 other joint British-Iranian citizens were freed by Tehran last week and allowed to return to the UK. Caroline Hawley reports.
Morad Tabas is 66 years old and suffering, his family say, from cancer. He was tracking endangered animals with cameras when he and a group of other conservationists were arrested in 2018 and accused of collecting classified information about strategic areas in Iran. His family say they were told by the UK government that he would be freed, along with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Newshour Shuri. But in the end, he spent just 48 hours out of prison. Mr. Tabas, who was born in London, also has an American passport. The Foreign Office said yesterday it was working closely with the United States to secure his permanent release.
The anti-corruption body in the Democratic Republic of Congo has accused staff at the Education Ministry of embezzling nearly $400,000. It said the money had been stolen from a $1 million fund set up for Africa's first ever inter-school football tournament, organised by FIFA. A senior official accused the anti-graft body of pursuing a vendetta against its staff. Ireland's rugby team have beaten Scotland by 26 points to 5 in Dublin during the Men's Six Nations Championship. Ireland now need England to beat France in their game to win the competition, and that game has just got underway. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Newshour from the BBC World Service, coming to you live from our studios in central London. I'm Julian Marshall, and shortly we'll be hearing from some of those who've managed to flee the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol, and about a new tribunal being proposed which could prosecute Mr. Putin for the crime of aggression. And we'll ask how come President Assad of Syria is being welcomed back into the Arab fold. In the 4th week of the invasion, Russian forces continue to lay waste to towns and cities in the northeast and south of Ukraine. The southern port of Mariupol has been besieged for weeks as Russia tries to connect a land route from annexed Crimea to territory controlled by separatists in the east. The residents of Mariupol now cower in underground shelters without heat, water and food, or try to risk their lives by fleeing the city. On Wednesday, the Russians bombed a theater in Mariupol, where 1,000 people were said to have sought shelter in an underground bunker, but efforts to reach them are now being hampered by street fighting. The mayor of Mariupol is Vadim Moisenko. Unfortunately, there is street fighting in the city centre, so there's no opportunity to do that. When it gets quiet, at least a little bit, rubble is being cleared and people get out. But it's impossible to provide more precise information at this stage. We need to wait until it's quiet. There are tanks and artillery shelling and all kinds of weapons fired in the area. That's the situation. Our forces are doing everything they can to hold their position in the city. But the forces of the enemy are larger than ours, unfortunately. But our guys are doing everything they can. And earlier I spoke to MP Yaroslav Zelezniak, whose family is from Mariupol. His sister got out of the city this week, and he's managed to speak to her.
My sister have left Mariupol 3 days ago. I just, when you have called me, spoke with her, and she described how they was in shelter. Of course, shelter was booked, and they haven't any assets in that. And thanks to God, they choose another shelter, because the first one has been destroyed by bomb, and she has not any information about the people who was inside. After 2 weeks, they have not food, and she said that I have a choice to go try to find in some shops clothes, so like steal some food, or to die without food. People always on the risk that some bomb, some weapon, some blast will kill them. There is a lot of dead bodies on the street. Nobody taking it to make some funeral or to hide them. So they're just lying on the street. A lot have been in the fire. A lot of them has been destroyed. A lot of bombing shelters have been destroyed with people once again inside.
How did your sister manage to get out of Mariupol?
Thanks to God, their car has not been destroyed. because a lot of people could not find car now. And they had heard from their friends that there is some path to Miletina and Mariupol, from Mariupol to Zaporizhia, and they took their car. It has been damaged with holes from bullets, but it was working. And it took 28 hours to get to the Zaporizhia. It's like 200 kilometers from Mariupol. But this long column of people who tried to be evacuated. And Shenfield forgot this column has not been under the fire.
Do you know, sir, what is happening in Mariupol today? I understand there has been fighting in the streets.
Yes, it's fighting in the streets. Look, for Putin, Mariupol is one of the key points, and he thought that with the best soldiers of his army, he could occupy Mariupol several days. But as we see, he still cannot do this, and still Mariupol is not under Russian control. And that's why they penetrated into the center of the city, and there is street fighting. Every minute, some people of Mariupol are dying.
What does the future hold, do you think, for Mariupol? Can it hold out indefinitely against the Russians?
I hope so, but you see, they just took a new strategy for destroying the whole city. If they want to just occupy it, they have not destroyed 90% of the building. If you look on the photos from Mariupol, it looks like Syria, it looks like Chechnya. It is almost destroyed.
And are there any plans to evacuate any more civilians? Is that going to be possible?
It is impossible, because from Ukrainian side we proposed it several times, and humanitarian transport has been stopped by Russian soldiers in the middle of this way to Mariupol. And there is still no humanitarian aid in Mariupol. There is no Red Cross. They have been evacuated. So there is no help. There is no evacuation buses in Mariupol. There is no way how to be evacuated unless you have car or have some friends and relatives with car and you could use it.
So people are only getting out of Mariupol if that they take a big risk.
Yeah, they could be killed any moment.
MP Yaroslav Zelezniak, whose sister left Mariupol 3 days ago, and the MP's sister is one of many who managed to reach the city of Zaporizhia, about 200 kilometers north of Mariupol. These refugees described what they'd left behind.
There is no Mariupol. We sat in the cellar for 10 days and did not leave once. We had neither water nor electricity. It was good that in the neighbour's yard we had access to a bomb shelter. Well, cellar. I wouldn't really call it a bomb shelter.
On the 12th, 13th and the 14th, there were constant airstrikes. We were all sitting in the cellar. Those who could do so left the city. But a lot of cars were bombed and they burned out, so people couldn't leave. There were lots of people dying on the streets. There were bodies in the streets.
Well, let's hear now from our correspondent, Wira Davis, who is in Zaporizhia. Now, in recent days and weeks, those people who've been able to flee from Mariupol have been coming through here, many of them, including children, being treated at local hospitals. But the big fear here now is that this city will become the next target for the Russian offensive. Indeed, in recent weeks, there have been sporadic missile attacks in the area. And in the last 24 hours, 7 people were reported to have been killed in attacks against a local training base and factories. And that's meant a curfew has now been declared, a 38-hour curfew in this city declared by the army and by local authorities. And that's already led to pretty big queues at checkpoints in the city, people fleeing the city much north to the town of Dnipro. Of course, the fear is that this city will soon resemble what has happened in Mariupol. That was the BBC's Wira Davis reporting from Zaporizhia. And within the past hour, the BBC has received a message on Telegram from the Mariupol mayor, who says that Russia has illegally transferred several thousand residents from Mariupol to Russia. He says some were redirected to remote cities in Russia, while the fate of others remains unknown. It's not possible to independently verify this allegation. Well, billions of dollars of humanitarian aid is now flowing into Ukraine, but how do you get it into cities like Mariupol, where it is so desperately needed? Since the conflict began, there have been intermittent ceasefires to allow civilians to leave the sieged population centers through humanitarian corridors. Though in Mariupol, they've been shot at by the Russians. So how do you set up proper formal corridors to ensure people can get out and humanitarian aid can be delivered? What conversations have to be had? I've been speaking to Emma Beals, who reported on the war in Syria and is now a senior advisor at the European Institute for Peace.
Yeah, those conversations tend to happen at a range of levels. We've seen the negotiations taking place between the Ukrainians and Russians about the larger ceasefire, but that has also included the conversation about humanitarian corridors. And there's also conversations going on, I think, between the United Nations and Russia as well, in terms of the confliction of humanitarian structures and of humanitarian convoys and supplies, as well as those access corridors. So it's a matter of sort of getting the warring parties, or one warring party in particular in this case, to agree to that, and to agree to it in terms that are operationally viable, which means a long enough period with a secure enough route that the humanitarian actors feel is guaranteed enough that they're able to put their staff at risk to be able to take those supplies through into something like a siege. And it really does rest on convincing that warring party that they are going to allow that access, even though it is obviously part of international humanitarian law and international law. They do need to do that.
But it would seem to be the case with Russia and Ukraine that it doesn't want humanitarian aid to be delivered to somewhere like Mariupol because it counters its own strategy of trying to, well, effectively starve the population to death.
Right. This is the problem that we're seeing in Ukraine, and it's one of the problems that we saw over the last more than decade in Syria. Time and time again in these sieges, we did see this position from Russia and allies in other settings where they did not want to allow the humanitarian aid because, exactly as you're saying, it countered their strategy, which was through military aggression, through attacks on humanitarian infrastructure, on hospitals, on the shelters that people are hiding underground in, through denial of food and medical assistance, to actually force those populations to surrender or capitulate, because that obviously happens a lot faster if you are depriving them of those things, despite the fact that it is very much against international law. But what we've seen in Syria as well is that we're, as a world, very poorly equipped to deal with a situation when the primary aggressor is not willing to allow that access or to, fall in line with the laws of war.
And there's nothing that can be done, you are suggesting, to persuade them otherwise. I mean, was there in Syria?
I mean, at some point they were able to get some of that assistance in, but one of the real worries, and I think that this is something that we should learn from absolutely going into the Ukrainian context, is that escalating that cannot take a long time. We can't ask nicely and ask nicely and ask nicely and wait until people are literally starving, which is something that did happen in the sieges in Syria, before it gets escalated to the next level, before it's brought up at the Security Council, before it's, made into an issue of big concern that has diplomatic ramifications and accountability attached to it. In some of these situations, we can see the trajectory that's playing out. We've seen it before, and we don't necessarily need to take the slow road again in terms of taking those next steps of raising those concerns into forums where actually maybe there's an ability to force their hand a little bit more.
That is Emma Beals, who reported on the war in Syria and is now a senior advisor at the European Institute for Peace. And still to come on Newshour, we hear how one ballet dancer from Ukraine who's fled to Poland has had to change her attitude to her calling.
It's a bit different for me. Before in Ukraine, dance was my soul. Ballet was my life. Now it's a job. My family has nothing. I need to work.
That report in full later in this edition of Newshour. The latest headlines from the BBC newsroom say fighting has been hampering efforts to reach hundreds of people still trapped beneath the bomb theater in the Ukrainian port of Mariupol. Ukraine's military is confirmed that a Russian missile hit a weapons depot in the west of the country on Friday, but couldn't confirm Moscow's statement that it was a hypersonic weapon. And the family of a British citizen imprisoned in Iran say they feel betrayed by the UK government. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is Newshour. Being underground has now become a way of life for Ukrainians across the country. Those in the capital, Kiev, have taken to sleeping in shelters to avoid the threat of shelling that now hangs over their city. Our international correspondent, Orla Guerin, spent the night in a bunker built in Soviet times.
Follow me, please. We're going deeper and deeper now into this cavernous underground space. Just passing some mattresses with blankets already made up on the left. Lots of bottles of water. And I just passed a chest set on my right to duck my head here. Going down further, it's a very extensive underground network here. Just rounding the corner, there's some ladies here. Good evening. Dobry wieczór. There's some children here staying, somebody already relaxing on a mattress with their laptop. And the rooms just go on and on. Well, there's a family of 3 women here tucked into a corner in among all the pipes and the machinery, and they're listening to the news to find out what's happening in the world outside. There's a mother and daughter sharing a mattress. They've made it as cozy as they can here. I'm with Zoe, who has just arrived for the evening. Zoe, what were you bringing in the bag with you? What do you bring here?
So my laptop, some yogurt, some biscuits, a bar of chocolate.
So how many nights have you been coming to the shelter?
So this is my 5th night here.
How does it feel to come down here?
You know, the first time when I came here, I cried. And if I continue talking, I will also cry. Because of the situation, you understand.
When you leave in the mornings now, Kiev has been attacked in recent days. Are you worried about what you may find out when you go out in the morning?
Sure. First of all, every time when I come here, I leave my cat in my apartment. I leave a lot of food, not only for one night, because I don't know if I come tomorrow or if I don't come to my home. So, and all the time I imagine a bad picture, really.
Coming up some rickety stairs, in through another doorway, into another room, and there's a Ukrainian flag hanging here from one of the pipes. Some people are already tucked in bed.
Where are you from?
Hi, we're from BBC Radio.
Okay.
Yeah, would you mind if we ask you a question?
Okay.
Great. What is your name?
Felix.
And how old are you?
22. Can I play our national anthem for you?
What does that mean to you?
It's a person special for me, of course, because of this event. Our sign for all Ukrainians that we will not surrender, and we are going to fight for our freedom and to lay our lives for it.
Orla Guerin reporting from Kiev, and we turn away from Ukraine to Syria, and the 11th anniversary of the uprising against President Assad passed virtually unnoticed this week, and he would likely not be president today had not the Russians intervened on his behalf in 2015. They used military tactics similar to the ones they're deploying in Ukraine, the heavy bombardment rather of populated towns and cities to suppress the rebellion against Syria's ruler. And Mr. Assad, once ostracized in the Arab world, has begun his rehabilitation. He's paid a brief visit to the United Arab Emirates, his first to an Arab country since 2011. And ironically, the UAE, which once supplied weapons to Syrian rebels, is now spearheading efforts to bring Syria back into the Arab world. Natasha Hall is at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. She specializes in the Middle East.
This is clearly part of a series of steps that have taken place since 2018, when the UAE reopened its embassy in Syria and was one of the first Arab countries to do so. Since then, the foreign minister has also flown to Damascus for a meeting with Mr. Assad, but to date, this is quite a signal, especially at this very critical juncture in time. Not only do you have Russia, which was one of Assad's primary military allies, invading Ukraine, a sovereign nation in Europe, but it's also critically the anniversary of the Syrian Revolution, 11 years down the line. And on top of that, you also have maybe steps closer to the JCPOA or the Iran nuclear deal as well. So I think that there's a lot of things happening at once, but this was clearly meant to be a very public sign that the UAE is not going to be necessarily simply strategically aligned to the United States, that it is going to be hedging with others, with China, with Russia, and other allies globally.
It does seem extraordinary, though, that this visit should go to the UAE, which once backed the rebels in Syria seeking to oust President Assad.
It's really quite incredible how fortunes have changed. And I think that that's also a signal to the United States, frankly. They do not see the U.S. as being necessarily a leader in the region, a player that was able to do anything when it comes to Syria to oust the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. And so now it's trying to reassess the chessboard itself. And it did this in Libya, it's doing this in Syria and elsewhere. Essentially, I think what the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed, is trying to do is essentially be a chess player rather than one of the chess pieces at this